Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another poetry discussion. This poetry discussion comes to us from Ezra Pound, kind of. The poem in question is known as The River Merchant's Wife, a Letter. This is not written by Ezra Pound, but instead translated by Ezra Pound from a poet known either as Li Bai, Li space Bai, or Li Po. This book here, literature, says Li Po. I have also seen this as from Li Bai. So depending on the source that you're getting this poem from, it might say one thing or another. The poem in question reads as such. While my hair was still cut straight across my forehead, I played about the front gate, pulling flowers. You came by on bamboo stilts, playing horse. You walked about my seat, playing with blue plums, and we went on living in the village of Chokan. Two small people, without dislike or suspicion. At 14, I married my lord, you. I never laughed, being bashful. Lowering my head, I looked at the wall. Called to 1,000 times, I never looked back. At 15, I stopped scowling. I desired my dust to be mingled with yours forever and forever and forever. Why should I climb the lookout? At 16, you departed. You went into far Kutoyen by the river of swirling eddies, and you have been gone 5 months. The monkeys made sorrowful noise overhead. You dragged your feet when you went out by the gate now. The moss has grown, the different mosses, too deep to clear them away. The leaves fall early this autumn in wind. The paired butterflies are already yellow with August. Over the grass in the west garden, they hurt me. I grow older. If you were coming down through the narrows of the river Kiang, please let me know beforehand, and I will come out to meet you, as far as Chofu Sa. Why do I bring this poem to the channel? I submit to the court Exhibit A in the case why I don't believe in love versus the American people. I believe love is just empathy times exposure divided by irritation. That's my TED Talk for the day. Love is empathy times exposure divided by irritation. Look, that's not why I bring this poem to the channel. This poem is a pretty good example of a couple things. It's a pretty good example of imagism. Imagism is fairly well known. Imagism is probably not something I've talked about many times on the channel, but it's something you're going to get in any poetry class probably that you ever take. So what I really want to talk about is another thing that I think this poem is a good example of, and that is burnt tongue writing. Burnt tongue writing and imagism, for me, kind of go together. And that's no real mystery, because imagism is a type of minimalism, and burnt tongue claims to be a type of minimalism. Burnt tongue is maybe a term invented by Tom Spanbauer. One moment. Tom Spanbauer. Where is my Tom Spanbauer? Ah, here. The Man Who Fell in Love with the Moon. I have not read this book, The Man Who Fell in Love with the Moon, but I have read Now is the Hour. Now is the Hour is an extremely powerful novel, and I recommend it. Now, What is burnt tongue writing? Burnt tongue writing, again, questionably invented by Tom Spanbauer, made popular by Chuck Palahniuk. This is the definition given from Chuck Palahniuk, which I think is a bit heavy-handed. I don't think that this is, and if you have read any of Chuck Palahniuk's, I don't think it would be a stretch for you to sort of shrug your shoulders and say, yeah, no, that's not the definition of burnt tongue. That's the Palahniuk version of burnt tongue. But Chuck Palahniuk says as such, to deliberately mistake things, misuse language, in a way that makes the language fresh and more engaging and particularized to a character. It gives a story a greater authority and realism. A stressed person, someone compelled to tell their story due to overwhelming emotions, is not going to speak in an elegant, polished manner. Burnt tongue acknowledges that how a person tells a story is as important as the story itself. Burnt tongue acknowledges that how a person tells a story is as important as the story itself. Now, I don't think that is particularly true in life. However, I think that it is excruciatingly true in literature. I think that the way your narrator, your speaker, is giving you a story is extremely crucial. And I think that what we're doing here, the reason I sort of pull together imagism and burnt tongue, imagism might be a more particular way to talk about burnt tongue in poetry, whereas burnt tongue is a way to talk about imagism in prose. So here's what I'm going to do. Pull this off the shelf. This is Tom Spanbauer. I'm going to open it up to a random paragraph. Never read this book, will have never read this paragraph. What you have to do, Delwood Barker said, is make a line with your breath from your mouth down all the way to your balls. This is that kind of book. When you get the breath to your balls, you pull the breath back behind your balls and in front of your asshole there, with where the wild moon man lives. Then you can take your breath through the crack in your ass and up to the base of your back. Then your back to the base of your skull. Then up to the top of your head. So, that's a pretty direct way of speaking. This individual, talking about breath in your balls, through your crack and all the way up to the base of your skull, certainly believes that. The veracity of what he or she, I don't know the character there, he or she was talking about, the veracity of what they were talking about is less important than the fact that they believe it. So why is that? The fact that they believe it can tell you all sorts of things about the character. Here, The Merchant's Wife, a Letter, we have the story of a child through a young woman who is slowly falling in love with her mate, with the person to whom she is married. There is this slow accrual of love, exposure times empathy. Because of that, the way that she's speaking grows more and more engaging to the reader. While my hair was still cut straight across my forehead, I played about the front gate pulling flowers. You came by on bamboo stilts playing horse. You walked about my seat playing with blue plums. And we went on living in the village of Chokan, two small people without dislike or suspicion. That sounds a lot like Hemingway. right? Very cut and dry, very here and there, very zick, 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 zick. To the last stanza here. Yeah. You dragged your feet when you went out. By the gate now, the mosses grown, the different mosses, too deep to clear them away. The leaves fall early this autumn in wind. The paired butterflies are already yellow and with August. Over the grass in the west garden, they hurt me. I grow older. If you were coming down through the narrows on the river Kiang, please let me know beforehand, and I will come to meet you, as far as Chofusa. This character's reality is different than the reality which might be observed from a different person. That's the power of burnt tongue. When a character is describing something for themselves through their experience, as Chuck Palahniuk says, acknowledging how a person tells a story is as important as the story itself. When a person is telling that story, you get all sorts of little bits of them wrapped up in it. This speaker in The River Merchant's Wife begins the poem very cold, very distant, but not with disdain. There was disdain present in the character at certain times. At 15, I stopped scowling. Because our speaker is in love with the river merchant, wishes for their ashes to be scattered together. Because that is the case, the anger being reflected upon cannot be expressed. It can be relayed, but not expressed. I think this is one of the big reasons why the burnt tongue stuff is much more for prose. In prose, if we have a first-hand narrator, most of the stuff we're getting is in real time. If this poem, The River Merchant's Wife, a letter, were written at 15 or at 14, we would be getting a whole different host of emotions. We're not getting those emotions because this is written when she is a grown woman who is missing her husband. So I think that burnt tongue writing is a very powerful tool because you're getting the reality as presented from someone. And that layer, as the reader, the audience, getting to acknowledge that the speaker has their own take on things, the reliability of the speaker, right? As an audience member, as a close reader, as a critical thinker, we are forced to engage with that text in a different manner. And that realization should change the way that we read everything. The way that we interpret advertisements, the way that we interpret the evening news, the way that we interact with all of the media that is given to us, the way that we interact with all of the media that we consume, the way that we interact with all the people who consume that media. We are in a world where we can't believe anything. And I know this is a strange transition from the River Merchant's Wife, a letter, to you can't trust the news. But these are the tools that with which literature endows us. The ability to think critically, the ability to take a speaker into account when consuming a text, when downloading media into our meat computer. So I think that's all I've got for this poetry conversation, this poetry discussion, from Li Pai or Li Bao, Li Bai or Li Po, as translated by Ezra Pound, The River Merchant's Wife, a letter. I hope to have you back for the next poetry discussion as well.